Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight we are going to Punjab. The Punjab of the 18th and 19th centuries, the land of 5 rivers, the most fertile agricultural territory in South Asia, the crossroads of the subcontinent where the Mughal Empire had begun its decline and where, in the space of a few extraordinary decades, a community that had been persecuted and scattered built one of the most formidable military and political powers in Asia. We are going to the world of the Sikhs, the community whose founding scripture says that women and men are equal before God, whose founding guru challenged the caste system and the treatment of women in the same breath, whose empire at its height extended from the Khyber Pass to the Sutlej River, and whose defeat by the British East India Company in the 1840s was the last major obstacle to British dominance over the entire subcontinent. And before we begin, let me tell you the 3 things that will stay with you through this entire story. First, Maharani Jind Kaur, the youngest wife of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the mother of the last Sikh Maharaja Duleep Singh, was described by the British colonial government as the most dangerous woman in Asia. Not as a charming nuisance, not as a minor inconvenience, as the most dangerous woman in Asia, which is a specific assessment that tells you something about what she was actually doing. She governed Punjab as regent for her young son, fought the British in 2 wars, was arrested and imprisoned, escaped from prison while under close surveillance by disguising herself as a servant, fled to Nepal where she became a guest of the Nepalese court, eventually made her way to London where she was reunited with her son who had been taken from her as a child and raised as an English gentleman, and spent the last years of her life in exile in England, refusing to submit, refusing to accept the British narrative of what had happened in Punjab, and maintaining to the end the position that what had been taken from her son was taken unjustly and should be returned. She died in 1863 in London, having never gone home. The Koh-i-Noor diamond, now in the British crown jewels, was taken from her son under a treaty that she maintained for the rest of her life was fraudulent and coerced. The diamond has not been returned. Second, the Sikh scripture, the Guru Granth Sahib, the living guru of the Sikhs, compiled over the 15th through 17th centuries by the 10 human gurus and containing the hymns of the gurus alongside the compositions of Muslim and Hindu saints, explicitly addresses the position of women in the spiritual order of the universe. Guru Nanak, the founder, said, "From woman, man is born. Within woman, man is conceived. To woman he is engaged and married. Woman becomes his friend. Through woman the future generations come. When his woman dies, he seeks another woman. To woman he is bound. So why call her bad? From her kings are born. From woman, woman is born. Without woman, there would be no one at all." The specific theological statement that women are not spiritually inferior, that they are the source and the substance of human life and therefore cannot be called bad, was the founding position of the Sikh tradition on gender, and it was made 500 years ago. Third, the langar, the community kitchen of the Sikh Gurdwara that provides free food to anyone who comes, without distinction of religion or caste or gender, that has been operating continuously in the Golden Temple complex at Amritsar since the 16th century, that feeds approximately 100,000 people every day at the Golden Temple alone, was founded on the labor of women. Mata Kivi, the wife of Guru Angad Dev, the second Sikh guru, is specifically credited in the Guru Granth Sahib with establishing the practice of the langar as an institutional reality, managing its operations, ensuring its quality, building the community of service that made it possible. The Bard Balwin's composition in the Guru Granth Sahib says of her, "Mata Kivi, a noble woman, distributes the bounty of the Guru's langar. She distributes the food with great care. The sweet kheer, the rice pudding thickened with butter and sugar, is distributed to all. Her children are satisfied and satiated. This is the only named woman in the Guru Granth Sahib who is celebrated specifically for her social and institutional contribution rather than for her spiritual qualities alone. She ran the kitchen. The kitchen feeds 100,000 people a day today. So go ahead and get comfortable. Lights down, blanket up. This one is slow and calm and going nowhere fast. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we're here every night, new story, same pace, lights always low. Let's begin. The Punjab, the name means the land of 5 rivers, from the Persian Panj, 5, and Ab water, is one of the most geographically distinctive regions of South Asia. The 5 rivers of the Indus system, the Jhelum, the Chenab, the Ravi, the Beas, and the Sutlej, flow across the Punjab plain from the Himalayan foothills to their eventual confluence with the Indus. And the water they carry and the soil they deposit have made the Punjab one of the most agriculturally productive territories on earth. The flat, fertile plain watered by 5 rivers supports a dense agricultural population, produces extraordinary surpluses of grain, and has been one of the most fought-over pieces of territory in the history of the subcontinent precisely because controlling it meant controlling the food supply and the trade routes of a vast region. The people of the Punjab in the 18th century were diverse: Hindu farmers and traders, Muslim zamindars and merchants, the various communities that centuries of migration and conquest had deposited in the river plain. Within this diverse Punjab, the Sikh community, whose origins lay in the spiritual revolution initiated by Guru Nanak in the late 15th century, had developed from a devotional movement into a political and military force through the specific pressures of the 17th and 18th centuries. The specific historical circumstances that transformed the Sikhs from a community of devotional practitioners into a military and political power were the persecutions of the Mughal emperors Jahangir and Aurangzeb, who had 2 of the Sikh gurus executed: Guru Arjan Dev, the 5th Guru, in 1606, and Guru Tegh Bahadur, the 9th Guru, in 1675. These executions, and the general pressure of the Mughal state on the Sikh community, produced a transformation in the community's self-understanding and its organization. The 10th Guru, Gobind Singh, created the Khalsa, the community of the pure, the brotherhood and sisterhood of initiated Sikhs, in 1699, an event that formalized the Sikh community's commitment to both spiritual practice and political resistance. The Khalsa's founding is one of the most dramatic and most significant events in Sikh history. Guru Gobind Singh called the Sikhs together at Anandpur Sahib on Baisakhi Day in 1699, and he asked who would give their head for the Guru. 5 men stepped forward, the Panj Pire, the 5 beloved ones, and they were initiated into the Khalsa with the Amrit ceremony, receiving the 5 Ks that are the visible markers of Khalsa identity: Kesh, uncut hair; Kangha, comb; Kara, steel bracelet; Kachera, specific undergarment; Kirpan, sword. The Guru then asked the Panj Pire to initiate him in turn, establishing the principle that the Guru was subject to the same discipline as the community he created. Women were part of this founding. Mata Sahib Kaur, the wife of Guru Gobind Singh, added sugar crystals, patasas, to the Amrit, the initiation nectar, making it both sweet and strong, symbolizing the combination of sweetness and valor that the Khalsa embodied. She is considered the mother of the Khalsa, the woman whose contribution made the founding ceremony complete. This is not a marginal or honorary role. The Amrit ceremony that initiated every subsequent Khalsa member was made what it was partly by a woman's contribution, and the tradition has remembered this. The Khalsa's founding injunctions explicitly addressed women's status. The Rehat Maryada, the Sikh code of conduct, established that women could participate in all aspects of Sikh religious practice. Women could read from the Guru Granth Sahib. Women could lead the Ardas, the Sikh prayer. Women could take Amrit and become Khalsa. Women were in the formal position of the tradition, not spiritually inferior. Whether the formal position was always matched by the practice is a different question, and we will be exploring both throughout this evening. But the founding theological position was clear, and it was stated clearly at the beginning, which gives it a specific significance in the tradition's self-understanding that positions taken later, after habits have been established, do not have. Let's begin, as we always begin, with the mourning. The mourning of a Punjabi Sikh woman in the late 18th century, in the period of the Sikh missiles, the Confederate political units that governed Punjab between the decline of Mughal power and the consolidation of the Sikh Empire under Ranjit Singh, in the specific conditions of the Punjab countryside. Before dawn in the Punjab, the morning that sustained everything. The Punjabi morning begins before the sun. This is one of those statements that is true of every agricultural civilization we have discussed, and it is particularly true of the Punjab in summer, when the heat that accumulates through the day makes the early morning hours not just pleasant but necessary. The work that must be done in the outdoor fields must be done before the sun is high enough to make the work impossible. The Sikh household's morning began with the Nitnem, the daily prayer, the specific compositions from the Guru Granth Sahib that observant Sikhs recited each morning. The Japji Sahib, the composition that opens the Guru Granth Sahib, was composed by Guru Nanak and is the morning prayer of every Sikh household. A meditation on the nature of God, on the path to spiritual liberation, on the relationship between the human soul and the divine reality. The recitation of the Nitnem was the first act of the Sikh day, the grounding of the day's activities in the spiritual framework that the tradition provided. Women recited the Nitnem. This is not a trivial statement. In many religious traditions of the same period, the formal recitation of scripture was either restricted to men or was understood as primarily a male responsibility. In the Sikh tradition, the morning prayer was the obligation of every Sikh regardless of gender, and the Punjabi Sikh woman who rose before dawn to begin the day's prayers was fulfilling the same religious obligation as her husband. After the prayers, the household's practical demands. The cow, the household's most valuable animal, the source of milk and clarified butter, and the dung that was used as fuel, needed to be milked before the milk became too warm. The fire had to be lit in the chulha, the clay cooking stove, for the morning meal. The water had to be brought from the well. These were the universal early morning requirements of the agricultural household, and in the Punjabi village they were women's responsibilities in the standard organization of the household. The morning meal of the Punjabi household was organized around the roti, the flatbread that was the staple of the Punjabi diet, made from the whole wheat flour of the Punjab's own grain. The atta, the whole wheat flour, was ground in the household or purchased from the mill, and the preparation of the roti required the management of the tawa, the flat iron griddle, over the chulha fire. The roti was made fresh for each meal, because the Punjabi tradition valued fresh hot bread with a specificity that made the reheating of day-old roti a compromise rather than a standard. The dal, the lentil preparation that was the primary accompaniment to the roti at the morning meal, was prepared in the clay pot over the chulha. The Punjabi dal tradition is both simple and rich. The lentils slow-cooked with the specific combination of spices that the Punjabi kitchen had developed, the tadka of ghee and spices poured over the cooked lentils to finish the preparation. The management of this cooking process, the timing of the ghee, the specific combination of spices, the judgment of when the dal had cooked to the right consistency, was a skill that the experienced cook had internalized through years of practice. The ghee, the clarified butter that was the primary cooking fat of the Punjabi kitchen and one of the most valued products of the household's dairy operation, was produced in the household from the cream of the milk. The process of churning the cream to produce butter and then clarifying the butter over heat to produce ghee was a regular household task, and the quality of the household's ghee was a marker of the quality of the household's dairy management. Punjabi cooking without ghee was a diminished thing, and the household that had good ghee from well-managed cows was a household that ate well. The textile production of the Punjabi household was organized around cotton. The Punjab was a cotton-growing region, and the management of the cotton from the field through the ginning and spinning and weaving was a household process that involved women's labor at every stage. The cotter, the hand-spun, hand-woven cotton cloth that was the everyday textile of the Punjabi rural household, was produced in the household and represented the specific textile tradition of the Punjab that would become symbolically significant in the nationalist movement of a later century. The Gurdwara, the Sikh house of worship, was the center of the community's social and spiritual life, and the women of the village participated in its daily operations in specific ways. The morning ardas, the communal prayer that concluded the morning service, was recited by the community together, men and women both present in the Gurdwara's main hall in the arrangement that Sikhism prescribed. Everyone seated on the floor at the same level. No distinction of gender or caste in the seating. The Guru Granth Sahib at the front of the hall in the position of the living Guru. The langar, the community kitchen attached to every Gurdwara, was the daily expression of the Sikh principle of seva, selfless service to others. The preparation and serving of the langar meal was a form of worship. The women who cooked in the langar kitchen were performing a religious act alongside a practical one, and the tradition understood this explicitly. The seva of the langar was open to all, men and women both serving, and the women who organized and managed the langar's operations were performing one of the most fundamental expressions of the Sikh values. Mata Kivi, the woman who made the langar real. Let's spend some time with Mata Kivi, because Mata Kivi represents something specific about the relationship between Sikh women's contributions and the tradition's formal acknowledgement of those contributions. She was born around 1506 CE in the village of Khader Sahib, which is now in the Tarn Taran district of Punjab. She married Guru Angad Dev, the second Sikh Guru, and she spent her adult life as the wife of the Guru, which meant that her household was simultaneously a private household and the center of the Sikh community's gathering. The langar was not invented by Mata Kivi. It had been established as a practice by Guru Nanak, the first Guru, as an expression of the principle that all human beings are equal and should eat together regardless of caste or social origin. But the practice that Guru Nanak established needed to be institutionalized, given a regular form that made it sustainable and available to the growing community of Sikhs, and this is what Mata Kivi did. She managed the langar's operations with the systematic attention of someone who understood that a religious institution is also a practical institution, and that its spiritual purposes can only be served if its practical operations are managed well. The food had to be of good quality. The specific mention in the Guru Granth Sahib of the kheer she prepared, the rice pudding made with butter and sugar, is a detail that speaks to the care she took about the quality of what was served. The portions had to be sufficient. The tradition of the langar is that no one should leave hungry, and managing the preparation of food in quantities sufficient for an uncertain number of guests required the specific practical intelligence of the experienced institution manager. The specific hymn in the Guru Granth Sahib that celebrates her, composed by the bard Balwand, included in the scripture as part of the Anadu section, is one of the most direct celebrations of a woman's practical institutional contribution in any religious scripture. It names her, it describes her work, and it celebrates what she did in the specific language of spiritual value. Her service in the Langar is presented as an expression of divine grace, the practical work of feeding people presented as one of the highest forms of spiritual practice. The significance of this recognition cannot be overstated. The Guru Granth Sahib is the living guru of the Sikhs, the final, permanent guru to whom all Sikhs defer for spiritual guidance. Its inclusion of a celebration of Mata Kivi's institutional work means that the tradition has encoded, in its highest sacred text, the message that women's contributions to the community's practical life are spiritually significant and worthy of perpetual commemoration. This is a specific theological statement, and it has been there since the scripture was compiled. Mata Kivi's contribution to the Sikh tradition was not just the specific institution of the Langar. It was the establishment of a model, the woman who serves the community through the specific genius of practical care, who creates the conditions in which the community can be fed and therefore can be together, who understands that the spiritual life requires material support and who provides that support with the excellence that makes it a form of worship. This model has been followed by Sikh women in every generation since, in the Langar kitchens of every Gurdwara in the world. The Langar at the Golden Temple in Amritsar today serves approximately 100,000 people daily. The food is free. It is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to everyone regardless of religion or caste or social status. The people who cook and serve it are volunteers performing seva. The institution that Mata Kivi helped make real in the 16th century is feeding 100,000 people a day in the 21st century. This is her legacy. The women of the Khalsa, warriors, administrators, and the ones who defended the Gurdwara. The Khalsa, the community of initiated Sikhs established by Guru Gobind Singh in 1699, was not exclusively male. Women could take Amrit and become Khalsa, which made them full members of the spiritual and martial community that the founding ceremony created. The specific implications of this membership for women's lives varied across the history of the Sikh community, but the formal inclusion was established at the founding and has been maintained as the tradition's position. The 18th century was the period of the greatest military crisis in Sikh history, the period of the Mughal persecutions under Aurangzeb and his successors, the Afghan invasions of Ahmad Shah Durrani, and the specific campaigns against the Sikhs that produced the Saka, the massacres of 1746 and 1762. In this period of existential threat, the Sikh community maintained itself through a combination of guerrilla warfare, strategic retreat into the forests and hills, and the specific solidarity of a community that understood itself as fighting for its survival. Women's role in this survival was specific and documented. The most extensively documented instance of women's martial participation is the period of the Kota Galugara, the Lesser Massacre, of 1746, and the Veda Galugara, the Greater Massacre, of 1762, when Ahmad Shah Durrani's forces attacked the Sikh community at places of worship and in the countryside. The women who were present in these attacks either died alongside the men who were killed or survived to continue the community's resistance, and the tradition preserves the memory of women who fought in the defense of the community rather than simply suffering the attack. The figure of the Sikh woman warrior, the Singni, the lioness, appears in the tradition's folklore and poetry as a real category rather than a metaphorical one. The biographical accounts of specific women warriors are not extensive in the historical record, which reflects the general problem of documenting women's military participation in periods when the documentation of military activities was itself sparse and when women's contributions were less systematically recorded than men's. But the tradition's consistent inclusion of women in the memory of the 18th century resistance, and the specific figures who are remembered by name in the tradition's poetry and stories, suggests that women's martial participation was real rather than merely legendary. My Bago, also called Mata Bag Kaur, is the most extensively documented of the Sikh women warriors, and her story from the early 18th century is one of the most remarkable individual stories in the Sikh historical tradition. She was from the village of Jabal Kalan in the Amritsar district, a devout Sikh woman whose husband was among the 40 Sikhs who had deserted Guru Gobind Singh at the Battle of Anandpur in 1704, signing a letter renouncing their allegiance to the Guru in exchange for their lives. When the news reached my Bago that her husband and the other 40 men had signed the renunciation, she was apparently furious, not with the Mughal forces who had forced the choice, but with the men who had made it. She organized a group of women from the village and went to find the deserters, shaming them into returning to the Guru's service. The story says that she led the men back to Guru Gobind Singh, who was at this point encamped at a place called Khidrana in the Muxar district. What happened at Khidrana in December 1705 is one of the most celebrated events in Sikh military history. A large Mughal force attacked the small Sikh encampment. The 40 men, the former deserters who had come back, and my Bago fought the Mughal force in what the tradition describes as a heroic last stand. All 40 men were killed. My Bago survived, wounded. When Guru Gobind Singh came to the battlefield and found the dying men, he blessed them, declaring that they were now the Muktas, the liberated ones, and the place was renamed Muxar, the Pool of Liberation. My Bago continued to fight alongside the Guru's forces after the Battle of Muxar. The tradition says she lived until old age, spending her later years in meditation and spiritual practice. She is venerated as a Sikh saint, and the Gurdwara at Muxar that commemorates the battle includes a specific memorial to her. There is a statue of her in full warrior's dress, the Sikh warrior's armor, the weapons of the 18th century, that captures something of what the tradition has made her, the woman who shamed the cowards into courage and then fought alongside them. The women of the 18th century Sikh community also performed the specific function of the Darawali, the woman who maintained the community's Gurdwara and sacred places in the periods when the men were away fighting. This function, the maintenance of the sacred institutions, the continuation of the community's spiritual life in the absence of the men who were otherwise engaged, was not simply domestic management. It was the specific preservation of the community's institutional life during the periods of greatest military pressure, and the women who performed it were performing a function that made the community's recovery possible when the crisis passed. The agricultural foundation, women's labor in the Punjab economy. Before we move to the court and the politics of the Sikh Empire proper, let's spend some time with the agricultural foundation that made the empire possible. Because the Punjab's wealth, the agricultural surplus that funded the armies and the courts and the institutional life of the Sikh Empire, was produced by the labor of the Punjab's farm families, and the women of those farm families were essential workers in that production. The Punjab agricultural system was organized around the seasonal cycle of the monsoon, which brought the rains that made the Kharif crops, the summer crops of cotton, rice, and millet possible, and the winter rains that supported the Rabi crops, the winter crops of wheat, gram, and mustard. The management of these crops through their seasonal cycles required sustained labor from the entire household, with the specific allocation of tasks between men and women following the conventions of the Punjabi agricultural tradition. Women's agricultural labor was not marginal or supplementary in the Punjab. The specific tasks that were understood as women's work included the weeding of the growing crops, the harvesting of certain crops, the processing of the agricultural output, and the management of the household's dairy and poultry operations. A Punjabi farm household without competent female labor was a household that could not manage its full agricultural operation, because the female-designated tasks were real productive work rather than token contributions. The wheat harvest, the most important agricultural event of the Punjabi year, was a whole family operation in which every available person participated. The cutting of the wheat with the small sickle, the gathering of the cut grain into sheaves, the transport of the sheaves to the threshing floor, the threshing and winnowing, these activities required the sustained labor of the full household labor force over the weeks of the harvest season. The cotton processing that followed the cotton harvest was primarily women's work. The ginning of the cotton, the removal of the seeds from the cotton fiber, was done on the charkha, the spinning wheel that would become one of the most politically significant objects in the history of South Asian nationalism. The spinning of the cotton fiber into thread was women's work, and the quality of the spun thread determined the quality of the woven cloth. The management of the household's cotton production from the harvested bolls through to the spun thread was the specific responsibility of the household's women. The dairy operation was the other major female responsibility in the Punjabi agricultural household. The cow and the buffalo were managed by the women, the daily milking, the churning of the butter, the preparation of the ghee, the management of the lassi, the diluted yogurt drink that was the characteristic beverage of the Punjabi summer were women's tasks. The quality of the household's dairy products was a direct reflection of the quality of the women's management of the dairy operation. And in a culture where good ghee and good lassi were markers of household competence, this management was visible and evaluated. The specific seasonal rhythms of the Punjabi woman's agricultural year had their own character. The spring harvest of wheat brought the intense labor of the harvest season alongside the celebration of Baisakhi, the spring festival that was simultaneously the agricultural new year and, after 1699, the anniversary of the Khalsa's founding. The autumn harvest brought Diwali and the preparation for the winter. The monsoon brought the Kharif planting and the specific management of the flooded fields. Each season had its specific tasks, its specific pleasures, and its specific demands, and the woman who managed her household's agricultural operations through the full seasonal cycle was managing a genuinely complex and demanding enterprise. The Sikh Empire and its women, the court of Ranjit Singh. Maharaja Ranjit Singh consolidated the various Sikh missiles, the Confederate political units, into a unified Sikh empire between 1799 and 1839, and the empire he built was one of the most remarkable political achievements of the early 19th century. He governed a diverse territory, Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh populations, Punjabi, Pashtun, and Dogra ethnic communities, with a pragmatism and a tolerance that were unusual in the political culture of the period. And his court at Lahore was a center of extraordinary cultural and artistic sophistication. The women of Ranjit Singh's court occupied a position that was shaped by the specific character of the Sikh imperial political culture. More visible and more politically involved than their counterparts in the Mughal court had been, constrained by the same structures of patriarchal authority that governed women's lives throughout South Asia, and navigating the specific dynamics of a court where multiple wives and the politics of succession made the women's world a politically significant space. Ranjit Singh had multiple wives. The exact number is debated by historians, with estimates ranging from approximately 20 to over 30, and the senior women among them were political actors in the court's factional politics. The Sarbali, the Committee of Senior Women, was an informal institution of the Sikh court that provided a space for the senior queen's collective interests and influence, and the management of this institution was one of the dimensions of court politics that the male political actors had to navigate. The most politically significant of Ranjit Singh's wives in terms of her impact on subsequent events was Jind Kaur, whom he married in 1835 when she was approximately 17 and he was in his 50s. She bore him a son, Duleep Singh, born in 1838, who would be the last Maharaja of the Sikh Empire. When Ranjit Singh died in 1839, the political crisis of the succession began, and Jind Kaur found herself in the center of it. The period between Ranjit Singh's death and the annexation of Punjab by the British East India Company in 1849 was one of the most turbulent decades in Punjabi history. The Sikh court was consumed by succession crises, assassinations of Maharajas, and the factional struggles of the various political actors who competed for control of the state. Jind Kaur navigated this period with a combination of political intelligence and genuine courage, eventually becoming regent for her son Duleep Singh in 1845. Her regency coincided with the First Anglo-Sikh War of 1845 to 1846, in which the Khalsa army fought the British East India Company's forces in a series of battles in the Punjab. The specific dynamics of these battles, and the evidence that the Sikh army's performance was compromised by the treachery of some of its senior commanders who had made private arrangements with the British, made the outcome worse than the military situation strictly required. The Treaty of Lahore in 1846 imposed severe terms on the Sikh state, including the cession of the Kashmir territory and a large indemnity. Jind Kaur did not accept these terms quietly. Her public opposition to the British presence in Punjab, her efforts to maintain Sikh independence, and her communication with the Sikh forces during the Second Anglo-Sikh War made her, in the British colonial government's assessment, a direct threat to British interests. Henry Lawrence, the British resident at Lahore, described her as the most troublesome of all the women connected with the Sikh court. This is a remarkable assessment coming from the British colonial apparatus, which had extensive experience with troublesome political actors of all kinds, and it tells you something about the specific quality of her opposition. The British confined her, then arrested her, then imprisoned her, first at the Lahore fort and then at the fortress of Chunar in Uttar Pradesh. She was separated from her son Duleep Singh, who was removed from Punjab and eventually taken to England, where he was raised as an English gentleman under the guardianship of the British government. From Chunar, where she was held under close surveillance, she escaped. This is a fact that the British colonial records document with a combination of outrage and grudging admiration. She disguised herself as a servant woman, leaving through a gate that her guards had not sufficiently secured, and made her way to Nepal, where she was received by the Nepalese court and given shelter. The British government's protests to Nepal about harboring a political fugitive were met with the Nepalese response that they were not obligated to surrender a guest. She remained in Nepal for several years, maintaining contact with the Sikh community, writing to her son through intermediaries when possible, and continuing to press the case for the return of Punjab and the Sikh Empire's sovereignty. When the British eventually allowed Duleep Singh to visit her in 1861, the reunion of a mother and son who had been separated for 14 years, the son now grown and thoroughly anglicized, the mother aged by years of exile and confinement. The accounts of the meeting are among the most moving in the history of the period. She died in 1863 in London, where she had come to be near her son. She was approximately 46 years old. She had been in exile since 1849, 14 years. She had never seen the Punjab again. The British colonial government, which had found her so threatening, gave her a pension. The specific quality of Jind Kaur's resistance, the maintenance of her position through years of imprisonment and exile, the escape from prison, the continued advocacy for her son's rights from Nepal and from London, is one of the most remarkable individual stories in the entire history of the British Empire's acquisition of South Asia. She was not a military figure. She did not command armies or fight battles in the way that Mabago had fought at Muxar. She was a political figure, fighting with the tools available to her, negotiation, advocacy, the maintenance of a political position under conditions designed to make its maintenance impossible. And she did not stop fighting until she died. The women scholars of the Sikh tradition. Let's talk about the women who engaged with the intellectual and textual tradition of Sikhism, the women who read and interpreted the Guru Granth Sahib, who participated in the scholarly discussions of the tradition, and who produced their own contributions to the religious and literary life of the Sikh community. The Guru Granth Sahib's composition is itself a statement about women's intellectual and spiritual capability. The scripture includes the compositions of women, most notably the compositions attributed to the wives of the Gurus, whose spiritual insight is presented as worthy of inclusion in the same sacred text that contains the Guru's own compositions. The inclusion of women's voices in the primary sacred text is a statement about the tradition's understanding of spiritual authority that goes beyond the formal theological position to the specific textual embodiment of that position. The Gurbani, the sacred compositions of the Guru Granth Sahib, was memorized and recited by women as well as men in the Sikh tradition. The woman who had memorized extensive portions of the scripture, who could recite at length from memory, who understood the specific linguistic and theological content of what she was reciting, was a woman who had engaged with the tradition's primary intellectual content with the seriousness that the tradition valued. The specific women who are documented as scholars and teachers in the Sikh tradition are fewer in number than we would wish, which reflects the general pattern of women's intellectual work being less systematically documented than men's. But the pattern that the tradition presents of women participating in the religious education and spiritual guidance of the community, of women teaching both women and men in the context that the tradition provided, is consistent enough to suggest that it was a real feature of the tradition rather than an exceptional anomaly. The grantee, the person who reads from and cares for the Guru Granth Sahib in the Gurdwara, is a role that women have filled in the Sikh tradition since the tradition's founding, and this represents a specific form of religious authority that the tradition has recognized for women throughout its history. The woman who reads from the Guru Granth Sahib in the morning service, who manages the scripture's physical care, who officiates at the various religious ceremonies of the Gurdwara, is occupying a position of genuine religious authority in the community. The Amrit ceremony, the initiation into the Khalsa, is conducted by the Panj Pura, the 5 initiated Sikhs who represent the original 5 beloved ones of the founding ceremony. Women can be part of the Panj Pura. The first time an all-female Panj Pura conducted the Amrit ceremony was, in fact, historically recent. The full implementation of the formal theological position on women's equality has been uneven and contested. But the theological position that women can be Panj Pura is established in the tradition's founding principle, and the implementation, however slow, follows from the position. The Kirtaniya, the performer of kirtan, the devotional music that is the central form of Sikh worship, has been a role that women have filled in the tradition from the beginning. The Guru Granth Sahib is not read silently. It is sung, to specific ragas, by trained musicians who understand both the musical tradition and the theological content of the compositions they sing. Women who were trained in this tradition were performing a form of religious leadership, bringing the community into the presence of the sacred through the specific vehicle of music that the tradition recognized as significant. The Golden Temple's Harimandir Sahib, the inner shrine at the center of the sacred complex, is served by raggis, the musicians who perform kirtan continuously through the day and into the night. Women have performed kirtan in the Sikh tradition throughout its history, and the specific tradition of all-female jathas, singing groups, performing at the Golden Temple and at major Sikh ceremonies is documented from the early 20th century and represents a continuation of a longer tradition of female religious musical performance. The wives and mothers who shaped the gurus. Let's spend some time with the women who were closest to the Sikh gurus. The wives and mothers whose specific contributions to the tradition are documented in the historical record with varying degrees of completeness, but whose influence on the development of Sikhism is real and important. Mata Tripta, the mother of Guru Nanak, the first guru, is one of the earliest figures in the tradition's memory of women's contribution. The birth of Guru Nanak in 1469 is surrounded by the specific folk tradition that attributes to his mother a recognition of his extraordinary destiny from his birth. Whether these traditions are historically accurate in their specific details is less important than what they represent about the tradition's understanding of women's role in the founding narrative. The Guru's spiritual greatness is understood as emerging partly from his origin in a specific woman's body and care. Mata Salakni, Guru Nanak's wife, married him when he was young and accompanied him through the years of his spiritual development and his family life before he began his missionary journeys. The tradition preserves her patience and her practical management of the household during his extended absences on the missionary tours. The Panj, that took Guru Nanak across South Asia and beyond. She raised their sons and maintained the household that was the base of the Guru's community. Mata Ganga, the wife of Guru Arjan Dev, the fifth Guru, who is credited with compiling the first version of the Adi Granth, later the Guru Granth Sahib, is associated in the tradition with a specific act of devotion that resulted in the birth of Guru Hargobind, the sixth Guru. She traveled, according to the tradition, to seek the blessing of the Sikh Saint Baba Buddha for the birth of a son, a humble act of pilgrimage that the tradition presents as the spiritual foundation of the sixth Guru's birth. Whether the specific account is historically accurate, it presents a woman as the agent of her son's spiritual preeminence through her specific act of devotion. Mata Gujri, the mother of Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Guru, and the grandmother of Guru Gobind Singh's 4 sons, has one of the most moving stories in the entire Sikh tradition. When Guru Gobind Singh was fighting the Mughal forces at Chamkaur in December 1704, the family was scattered. Mata Gujri escaped with the Guru's 2 youngest sons, Zorawar Singh, aged 9, and Fateh Singh, aged 7, and they were eventually betrayed by a servant and handed over to the Mughal governor of Sirhind, Wazir Khan. Wazir Khan demanded that the 2 boys convert to Islam. They refused. He had them executed. The specific method was to have them bricked up alive in a wall. Mata Gujri, who was being held in a tower while this happened, died when she learned of her grandson's fate. Whether of grief or from the cold of the exposed tower in December is not entirely clear from the sources. The specific story of Mata Gujri and her grandsons is one of the most emotionally significant in the Sikh tradition, and it is told in the context of the extreme persecution that the community faced in the early 18th century. The young boys who refused to convert, and the grandmother who raised the Guru whose sons they were, their specific combination of faith and endurance is presented in the tradition as the expression of the values that the community maintained under the most extreme pressure. Their story is commemorated in the Gurdwara Fatehgढ़ Sahib at Sirhind, which is one of the most visited Sikh pilgrimage sites, and in the annual commemoration of the Shahidi, martyrdom, of the Sahibzade at Christmas time each year. The women who know this story, who have been told it from childhood, who recite it in the community's religious gatherings, who carry it as part of their understanding of what the Sikh community has survived, are carrying a specific form of historical memory that connects the present to the founding crisis of the tradition. The Langar kitchen, daily service, and the theology of food. Let's go into the Langar kitchen, because the Langar kitchen is one of the most important spaces in the Sikh world, and the daily life of the women who have worked in it represents one of the most consistent and most significant expressions of Sikh values in practical form. The Langar operates on several theological principles simultaneously. The principle of seva, selfless service, means that the work of the Langar is understood as worship, not as labor in the ordinary commercial sense. The person who cuts vegetables or washes dishes or serves food in the Langar is performing an act of devotion as genuinely as the person who reads from the Guru Granth Sahib or performs kirtan. The tradition does not distinguish between these forms of service in terms of their spiritual value. The principle of Langar also expresses the Sikh commitment to equality. The food of the Langar is the same for everyone, the Maharaja and the sweeper, the Brahmin and the Dalit, the Sikh and the Muslim and the Hindu and the tourist eat the same food from the same kitchen. The specific elimination of caste-based food taboos, the specific Brahminical convention that caste Hindus could not eat food prepared by lower caste people, was one of the most direct expressions of the Sikh tradition's rejection of the caste system, and the Langar was the institution through which this rejection was expressed daily and practically. The women who have managed the Langar kitchens across the centuries of the tradition have been managing institutions of significant scale and specific institutional complexity. The Golden Temple's Langar prepares food for approximately 100,000 people daily. This is not a small catering operation. It requires industrial quantities of flour, rice, lentils, vegetables, and fuel. It requires the management of hundreds of volunteers who come to do seva. It requires the specific knowledge of large-scale cooking that produces food in consistent quality and adequate quantity across thousands of individual servings. The daily management of the Langar at a village Gurdwara is a smaller operation but the same in kind. The women who arrive before the morning service to prepare the Langar meal, who organize the volunteers, who manage the cooking, who ensure that the food is ready when the service ends and the congregation is hungry. These women are performing the daily institutional work that makes the Langar's theological commitment visible and tangible. The specific foods of the Langar tradition reflect the Sikh community's agricultural and dietary heritage. Dal makhni, the black lentil preparation slow-cooked with butter and cream, is one of the most characteristic Punjabi dishes and one of the most frequently prepared in the Langar kitchen. Roti made from whole wheat flour, cooked on the large tawa, hot and soft and served with the specific hospitality that the Langar embodies. Kara Prasad, the sweet semolina pudding made with equal weights of flour, sugar, and ghee that is distributed at the end of every Gurdwara service, is prepared in the Langar kitchen and represents the specific blessing of the Guru that is shared with everyone present. The preparation of Kara Prasad is a specific ritual act. It is made according to a specific recipe in iron vessels by Sikhs who have performed ablutions before beginning the preparation. The specific religious care that goes into its preparation, the reading of specific banis, prayers, during the making, the maintaining of ritual purity throughout the process, makes it simultaneously a food preparation and a religious ceremony. The women who prepare it are performing both simultaneously. The Langar Seva is performed by men and women both in the Sikh tradition, and the visual image of the Golden Temple's Langar kitchen with hundreds of volunteers of different genders and ages and nationalities engaged in the various stages of preparing food for 100,000 people, is one of the most vivid expressions of the Sikh values of seva and equality that the tradition has produced. The women in this kitchen are not occupying a separate female space. They are working alongside men in the shared service of the community, which is the Langer's theological statement about gender made visible in practice. The women of the Gurdwara reading, singing, serving. Let's spend some time with the daily life of the Gurdwara and women's participation in it, because the Gurdwara is the institutional center of Sikh community life, and women's relationship to it is one of the most direct expressions of the tradition's formal theological position on gender. The Gurdwara is open to everyone. This is the first statement, and it is not trivial. In many of the religious traditions of the same period and the same region, the sacred spaces were differentially accessible by gender. Women entered from a separate entrance, sat in a separate section, had access to a restricted part of the sacred complex. In the Sikh Gurdwara, the main hall of worship, the Darbar Sahib, is entered from the same door by everyone. Everyone sits on the floor at the same level. The only restriction is the removal of shoes and the covering of the head, which applies to all. The morning service, the Asa Divar, is the primary daily service of the Sikh Gurdwara. The extended morning curtain that begins before dawn and continues through the morning hours. Women participate in this service as congregation members, as curtain performers, and as grantees. The grantee who opens the Guru Granth Sahib in the morning, who performs the Hukamnama, the daily reading, who manages the scripture's physical care through the day. This person can be a woman, and in many Gurdwaras is a woman. The performance of curtain, the sung recitation of the Guru Granth Sahib's compositions to specific ragas, requires training in both the musical tradition and the scriptural content. Women who have received this training perform curtain in Gurdwaras throughout the world, and the tradition of women's curtain performance is documented from the early history of the religion. The specific all-female jathas that perform at the Golden Temple and at major Sikh ceremonies are among the most celebrated of the tradition's musical practitioners, and their performances are attended by large congregations who come specifically to hear them. The management of the Gurdwara's daily operations involves women at every level. The management of the langar, as we have discussed. The care of the Guru Granth Sahib, the specific physical care of the scripture, the management of the chore, the whisk that is waved over the scripture as an act of respect, the arrangement of the Darbar Sahib for services. These are tasks that the grantee and the Sevadar, volunteer servant, perform, and women serve in both roles. The Akhan path, the continuous, uninterrupted reading of the Guru Granth Sahib that takes approximately 48 hours to complete and that is performed at major occasions in the Sikh calendar, requires teams of readers who take turns reading the scripture without interruption. Women readers participate in the Akhan path, and the tradition of women's scriptural reading at this most intensive form of the Sikh religious practice is one of the most direct expressions of women's full participation in the tradition. The women of the 1984 crisis, faith under extreme pressure. Let's talk about what happened to Sikh women in the crisis of June 1984. The Indian Army's Operation Blue Star, the attack on the Golden Temple complex ordered by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Not in detail that risks becoming graphic, and not in the political analysis that the event requires more space than we have tonight, but in the specific way that it expressed something about Sikh women's relationship to their faith and their community under the most extreme possible pressure. In June 1984, the Indian Army entered the Golden Temple complex at Amritsar, the holiest site in the Sikh world, to remove the Sikh militant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale and the armed supporters who had taken refuge there. The operation involved major military force, including tanks, and resulted in significant damage to the complex, including to the Akal Takht, one of the most sacred structures in the Sikh world. The women of Amritsar and the surrounding region, and the women who were in the Golden Temple complex when the operation began, experienced it with the specific combination of devotion and horror that the attack on their most sacred site produced. Women who were pilgrims in the complex when it was sealed were caught in the crossfire. Women in the surrounding city watched the damage to the site they had grown up venerating. The response of Sikh women to the crisis expressed the specific character of Sikh women's relationship to their faith. The immediate response was practical: the management of the aftermath, the care of the wounded and the displaced, the maintenance of the community's spiritual life in the immediate period following the attack. The Guru Granth Sahib was damaged. The Akal Takht was in ruins. The Langar continued. The curtain continued. The morning prayers continued. Because these are what continue regardless of what happens, and the women who maintained them in the days after the attack were expressing the fundamental Sikh commitment that the faith is not in the buildings but in the community's practice. The longer-term response of the Sikh community to 1984, the October assassination of Indira Gandhi, the anti-Sikh pogroms in Delhi and other cities that followed, the years of violence and loss in Punjab, continued to make specific demands on Sikh women's emotional and practical resources. The women who managed the households of men who were killed or imprisoned or disappeared, who raised their children through years of community trauma, who maintained the community's institutional life through the decades of crisis. These women were performing the same function that Sikh women had performed in the 18th century when the community faced the Mughal persecutions. The maintenance of the community's continuity through the specific forms of practical care and spiritual commitment that only sustained human attention can provide. The Langar today, what Mata Kivi's kitchen became. Let's end with the Langar, because the Langar is the most continuous and most visible expression of the Sikh women's tradition we have been discussing, and its present reality is a direct continuation of the founding act that Mata Kivi made real in the 16th century. The Golden Temple Langar operates on a scale that requires industrial management. The daily preparation of food for 100,000 people requires approximately 10,000 kilograms of flour per day, 5,000 kilograms of lentils, 5,000 kilograms of rice, 2,000 kilograms of vegetables. The fuel requirement is enormous. The equipment, the giant karahis, iron pots, in which the dal and the sabjis are cooked, the industrial roti-making machines that supplement the hand-rolling of thousands of rotis daily, represents a significant capital investment. The management of this operation, the supply chain, the volunteer coordination, the quality management, the waste management is a genuine institutional challenge. The management of the Golden Temple Langar is performed by the Shromani Gurdwara Parbhan Committee, the elected body that manages the Golden Temple and the major Sikh historical Gurdwaras of Punjab. This management structure includes women, and the specific women who have served in the management of the Langar's operations have been performing institutional management at a scale that few organizations anywhere in the world match. The volunteer system that makes the Langar possible is one of the most successful voluntary labor systems in the world. On ordinary days, the Langar relies on hundreds of regular volunteers who perform seva in the kitchen and the dining hall. On major pilgrimage occasions, Gurpurabs, the birthdays and martyrdom days of the Gurus, the numbers swell dramatically as Sikhs from around the world come to do seva at the Golden Temple. The coordination of this variable volunteer workforce, the maintenance of food quality across wildly varying volumes, the management of the dining experience for hundreds of thousands of people, This is operational management at a level that the business world would recognize as sophisticated and demanding. The women who perform seva in the Langar kitchen today are performing what Mata Kivi performed in the 16th century, the specific act of feeding the community as an expression of faith, the translation of the theological principle that all are equal and all deserve to eat into the daily practical reality of cooking and serving. The kheer that the Guru Granth Sahib mentions Mata Kivi distributing, the sweet rice pudding, is still made in the Langar kitchens of Gurdwaras around the world. The recipe is old. The practice is continuous. The women making it are in a chain of service that stretches back 5 centuries. The rivers still flow, what Punjab's women left behind. It is very late now. The Punjab is dark in the specific way that the flat agricultural plain is dark, the fields stretching in every direction in the darkness, the rivers moving silently toward the Indus in the channels they have been following for millennia, the stars above the plain in the specific quality of clarity that the Punjab sky has in the early morning hours before the dawn. The golden temple is lit. It is always lit. The complex does not close. The Guru Granth Sahib is present in the Harimandir Sahib continuously. The curtain is performed continuously through the 24 hours. The Langar serves continuously. Someone is reading the scripture right now in the specific cadence of the Gurbani that a trained grantee produces. Someone is serving food in the Langar right now, ladling dal into the steel thalis of the people who have come to eat. The service that Mata Kivi established in the 16th century is ongoing at this moment. Jind Kaur died in London in 1863. She never went home, but the tradition she represented, the Sikh woman who refuses to accept the erasure of her community's rights, who maintains her position under conditions designed to make its maintenance impossible, is not gone. It is present in the Sikh community's ongoing relationship with the history of what happened in Punjab, the ongoing conversations about the Koh-i-Noor and Operation Blue Star and all the things that were taken and all the things that were damaged. The refusal to let these things be forgotten is the continuation of her specific refusal. My Bago statue stands at Muxar, in the battle dress of the 18th century Sikh warrior, facing in the direction from which the Mughal forces came. She is not a passive figure in the statue. She is armed and ready, and the specific posture of the statue captures the quality that the tradition has preserved in her. The woman who shamed the cowards into courage and then did not stay behind when the fighting started. The women of the Langar kitchens are the largest and most continuous group in this story. The women across 5 centuries who have made the roti and the dal and the kara prasad for the community that gathers at the Gurdwara, who have sustained the institutional expression of the principle that everyone is equal and everyone deserves to eat. Their names are mostly not remembered. The tradition does not systematically document the names of the people who perform seva. But the institution they sustained is one of the most remarkable expressions of a religious value in practical form that the world has produced, and it is still operating, feeding 100,000 people a day in the city of Amritsar. The Guru Granth Sahib still contains Mata Kivi's name. It still says what it has been saying since the 16th century about the woman who distributed the bounty of the Langar with great care. It still says that her children were satisfied and satiated. 11 generations of Sikh women have read this in the scripture, have known that the tradition remembers the woman who built the kitchen, have carried this knowledge as part of their understanding of what women can be and what women have been in the tradition they belong to. The roti is still being made. The kheer is still being prepared. The Langar is still open. Sleep well. Good night.